Okay, this week we've been talking about how to factor polynomials, specifically by taking the greatest common factor out, or if we have a difference of squares, how to factor it when it's in that form. And that's what your test is going to be on this week. So let's get started with your study guide. There will be some vocabulary on your test this week. So separating a polynomial back into a product is called, you need to know what that is called, and that is called factoring. So please make sure you know that that's called factoring, because that will be in your test. Factoring is separating a polynomial back into a product. Now, polynomials that cannot be factored are called, well, if you can't factor a polynomial, we call that a prime. Polynomials that cannot be factored are called prime. And then the last thing that you need to know in this definition section here is the rule to use when factoring a difference of squares. So if we have a squared plus b squared, then we would split that up to, I'm sorry, that shouldn't be a squared plus b squared. Your study guide is incorrect. It's a difference of squares. So that should be a squared minus b squared. So if we have a squared minus b squared, it would be a plus b times a minus b. Now let's talk about this error in your study guide really quick. So that should have been a minus, not a plus. So if you do in fact get something that maybe looks like this, 25x squared plus let's do 16y squared. Now you can take the square root of 25, you can take the square root of 16, and you can take the square root of x squared and y squared, right? But you can't, this isn't a difference of squares, because difference means subtract. It's subtraction. Okay, so you have to be dealing with subtraction. And that's when you could go ahead and split them up into this format right here. This would not be a difference of squares, so if you're given this, you could always look to see if you have a greatest common factor, which in this case we don't. The only factors of 25 besides itself are 5. Is 5, I'm sorry, and you can't divide 16 by 5. So this, because of this plus, would be prime. You would not be able to factor that. So please make sure you correct that error on your study guide. That should be a minus, not a plus sign. That should be a minus. Now, before we get into actually factoring, make sure you try all these out on your own, because that's the best way to actually study, to make sure that you know how to do it on your own. All right? So number 4, we are asked to factor by finding the greatest common factor. So if we look at number 4, we first want to look at the coefficients, which is, well, in this case we have 45, and then we have this constant here, which is 25. And we would want to find the greatest common factor of those two numbers. All right? So the only factors of 25 are 5, but besides itself is 5. Now you can't divide 45 by 25, so the greatest common factor would in fact be 5, because you can divide 45 by 5. All right, and remember I showed you how to find the greatest common factor on your calculator as well. Now, can we factor out any variables? Well, we have an x here, or an x squared, but we can't take out any x's or anything like that, because if we look at the second term of this binomial, we don't have an x there. So we can only factor out a variable if it's on all of the terms in a specific polynomial. So the only thing that we could factor out is that 5. And what would we have left? Well, if we factor out a 5, that means we need to divide 45 by 5. Now 45 divided by 5 is 9. Right? And then we didn't divide x squared by anything, so we're just going to bring that down. Then 25 divided by 5 would be 5. So this would be 9x squared minus 5 would be your final answer. And that is, in fact, that's how we would factor using, by taking the greatest common factor out. All right, number 5. First we look at the coefficients, which are 5 and 13. Both of these numbers are prime. All right, 5 is a prime number because you can only divide 5 by 5. And 13 is a prime number because you can only divide 13 by 13 and get a whole number as your answer, right? So that means unless you could divide 13 by 5, you can't really take any greatest common factor out of 5 and 13. And you can't divide 13 by 5 and get a whole number as your answer. So there is no greatest common factor with our coefficients. Next, we would look at the variables. And while both of these monomials have a variable, or while both of these terms have a variable, they are different. You have to have the same variable in order to be able to factor it out. So you can't take out an x, you can't take out a y, you can't do anything with the 5 and the 13. So we can't factor this. So when we can't factor something, what does that mean? Well, that means that this is, in fact, prime. We can't factor it. It is prime. Okay, 56 minus 35p. So we have this constant here and then this coefficient. If we look at that, the factors of 35 are 1, 5, 7, and 35. Okay, so we can't divide 56 by 5, but we can divide it by 7, and that would be the greatest common factor because we can't divide 56 by 35. So we can take out a 7. We take out a 7. I'm sorry, before we do that, can we take out a p? No, because this term here does not have a p. So if we take out a 7, it would be 56 divided by 7, which is 8, right? It's 8 minus 35 divided by 7 is 5, and then we did nothing with the p, so we just bring it back down. Now, on your test, if you want to double check and make sure your answer is correct, please use the distributive property to check your answer. If we use the distributive property to check our answer, 7 times 8 is, in fact, 56. And 7 times negative 5p is, in fact, negative 35p. So you can see how you get your original answer, your original polynomial when we use the distributive property. And that shows right away that you did this correctly. So on your test, please make sure you check your answers by distributing. Double check your answer. Make sure that everything's correct. All right. Here we have a 7 and a 35 on our coefficients. So the greatest common factor of 7 and 35 would be 7. So we can take out a 7 out of there. Now let's look at the variables. Here we have an a, but in order for us to take out an a, it has to be present in all of the terms in this polynomial. This polynomial only has 2 terms. It's a binomial, so if we look at that second term, it does have an a, so we can take an a out. Now, because both of them have an a, we could take an a out, but how many a's can we take out? Well, it depends. You have to look at which one of these has the lowest exponent, and that would be this first one, which is a to the first power. So we can only take out 1a, 7a. Next, let's look at the b. If we look at the b, both of them have a b. Both terms have a b in this binomial, and they're both to the first power. So that's the lowest power. We could take out a b. And then we go ahead and divide. So let's start with this one. 7 divided by 7 is 1. A divided by a is 1, and b divided by b is 1. So this whole thing divided by this whole thing is just going to cancel out. It's just going to become 1. Okay? So this will just be 1. And then that's going to be minus. Now we have this one in blue. 35 divided by 7 is 5. Now, a squared divided by a, that's just going to be 2 minus 1 in the exponents, right? We're taking 1a out of a squared, so we're left with just an a. So that would be 5. That would be 5a, and then these b's here are going to cancel out. B divided by b, we won't have any more b's. So that's going to be your final answer. Seven ab times 1 minus 5a. All right, so we look for the greatest common factor first in the coefficients. and constants. So if we look at the coefficients and constants of this trinomial, we have 20, 30, and 30. Greatest common factor of 20, 30, and 30, the biggest number that we can divide 20, 30, and 30 by and still get a whole number as our answer is going to be 10. Now, if you look at the variables, we have x to the fourth, x, and then nothing over here. So the first two have an x, but the third one does not. Now remember, in order to be able to factor out a variable, the variable must be present in all the terms on that polynomial. So because it's not present in all of the terms, we can't take out an x. Only thing we could take out is a 10. If we take out a 10, that'd be 20 divided by 10, which is 2. Did nothing with the x's, so I'm just going to bring the x down. Take out a 10, 30 divided by 10 is 3. Did nothing with the x's, so I'm just going to bring it down. Then we take out a 10, 30 divided by 10 is 3. And that would be your final answer. And last but not least, number 9. All right, so first we would look at the coefficients. 48, 56, 56. So it looks like the greatest common factor of 48, 56, and 56 is going to be 8. And we look at our variables. We have a squared, a to the third, a to the fifth. So all three terms have an a. Now how many a's are we going to be able to take out? That is the one, that's the term that has the least, the smallest exponent, right? So we'd only be able to take out an a squared. Okay. Next, we look at our b's. All three terms have at least one b, right? But these only have one, exactly one. So we'd only be able to take out just one b. And we start our division. Now, if you divide 48 by 8, you get 6. Then a squared divided by a squared, the a's will cancel out. B squared divided by b, you take 1b out of b squared, you're left with just 1b. That's going to be minus 56 divided by 8, it's going to be 7. You take 2 a's out of 3 a's, you're left with just 1a. And if you take a b out of b, those are going to cancel out. And that's going to be minus, again, 56 divided by 8 is 7. You take 2 a's out of 5 a's, you're left with 3 a's. And then the b's are going to cancel out. So your final answer is going to be 8a squared b times 6b minus 7a minus 7a cubed. Factor each difference of squares. So first we need to make sure it's a difference, meaning we have a minus sign. And then we need to make sure that we have things that we can take the square root of. All of these are things that we could take the square root of. So difference of squares means that we will go ahead and use this rule here. If we have a squared minus b squared, that's going to equal a plus b times a minus b. That's a difference of squares. All right, and that's exactly our case with number 10. So the square root of 9 is going to be 3. And the square root of x squared is just x. The square root of 1 is 1. And it's 3x plus 1 times 3x minus 1. And that would be your final answer. Number 11. Again, we have a difference. And we have things that we could take the square root of. So first you would take the square root of 4, which would be 2. Square root of n squared is just going to be n. Remember, when you're taking the square root of a variable that has an exponent, you're just dividing that exponent by 2. And then that's going to be minus the square root of 49, I'm sorry, plus the square root of 49, which is 7. So it's 2n plus 7 times 2n minus 7. And that would be your final answer. And if you want to check your answer, FOIL it out, distribute, and make sure you get what you're supposed to get. Again, we have a difference. These are all things that we could take the square root of. So let's do it. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of y squared is y. And then times 3x minus 4y. That would be your final answer. And number 13, we have things that we could take the square root of, and we have a difference. So let's go ahead and do it. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of m to the 6th is m to the 3rd. Square root of z to the 4th is z squared. That's plus square root of n to the 4th, which is n squared. And the square root of z squared is z. And then we're going to multiply that times 4m cubed z squared minus n squared z. And one more. Let's take a look at this one. 25x squared y to the 4th plus 16z to the 4th. Okay. Now you might say, hey, you could take the square root of these, right? But the reason why this would be prime would be because of this plus sign. So this plus sign would make it prime because you can't use difference of squares if you have addition. And we also don't have any greatest common factors that we'd be able to take out. So this would be, in fact, prime. All right, in the last 4 problems, you are asked to find a GCF first, then factor each difference of squares. All right, so if we look at number 14, we'd have to take out a GCF first. And if we look at this, we have a 2 and an 18, which do have a greatest common factor. That would be 2. And what would we have left? It would be x squared minus 18 divided by 2 is 9. Now we have a difference, and then we have things that we could take the square root of. So this 2 here, we're not doing anything with. Okay? We're not doing anything with this 2, so we're just going to bring it down. But this right here, we're going to break it up using what we know about difference of squares. The square root of x squared is x. And the square root of 9 is 3. And then that would also be x minus 3. And that would be your final answer. Okay, now we have 180m squared minus 5. Again, we could take out a 5. And 180 divided by 5 is 36 m squared. And then 5 divided by 5 is 1, so it'd be minus 1. And now we could go ahead and we have a difference of squares, so we could go ahead and factor this out even more. We're not doing anything with the 5, so we're just going to bring that down. The square root of 36 is 6, and the square root of m squared is m. Square root of 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. All right, and that's 6m plus 1 times 6m minus 1. That would be your final answer. Now, 216 and 6 are our coefficients, so it looks like we do have a greatest common factor of 6. Now, we're not done yet because we need to look at our variables. We have an x here, x to the 4th power. We don't have any x's in our second term, so we can't factor out an x. We have an a here and a here, so we can actually take out an a as well. That's part of the greatest common factor. And then we have a y here and a y to the 5th here, so we could also take out 1y because y to the 1st power would be our lowest coefficient, and that would be y to the 1st power would be our lowest coefficient. I think I already said that, sorry. So now that we factored that out, let's see what we have left. 216 divided by 6 is 36. We didn't do anything with the x to the 4, so I'm just going to bring that down. Then a and a, these two a's here, are going to cancel out. And so are the y's. So it's just 36x to the 4th. That's minus 6 divided by 6 is 1. Right? These a's here are going to cancel out. And then y to the 5th divided by y would be y to the 4th. Now we have a difference of squares. So I'm just going to bring this down. The square root of 36 is 6. Square root of x to the 4th is x squared. Plus square root of y to the 4th is y squared. And then that would be the same thing on this end, just with a minus instead of a plus. That's your final answer. And then number 17, we go ahead and factor out a 4. and we could go ahead and factor out an m. And if we do that, we are left with, well, 4 divided by 4 is 1. We didn't do anything with x to the 4th, so I'll just bring it down. Then these two m's here are going to cancel out. M divided by m is 1, cancels out. All right, and then that's going to be minus 36 divided by 4 is 9. We didn't do anything with the y, and then again, these m's are going to just cancel out. Now we have a difference of squares, so bring down your greatest common factor, which is 4m, and let's split this up. A square root of x to the 4th is x squared. The square root of 9y to the 4th would be 3y squared. And then we would do the same thing over here, except with a minus instead of a plus sign. And that would be your final answer. So that's it. Do some more problems like these tonight to make sure you completely understand how to do this. The more practice that you get, the better you'll be prepared for tomorrow's test. If you have any questions, please come to tutoring tomorrow morning. But good luck on your test, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.